Anakin Skywalker was, pound for pound, stronger with the Force than any other Jedi who had ever lived. Even beyond his own natural strength, Anakin was trained from a young age in lightsaber combat, fought in the Clone Wars, and even managed to kill the imposing Count Dooku. After vowing allegiance to Emperor Palpatine and the Sith Order, Anakin led an attack on the Jedi Temple where he personally wiped out many of the Jedi inside. He only became stronger after his transformation into the Sith Lord Darth Vader, when his physical limitations required him to further develop his already formidable Force skills. In fact, he became so strong that he was able to kill people without even touching them, using the Force to choke people, hurl objects from a distance, and even reflect blaster bolts back at attackers with his hand. Using his anger and hate to fuel his use of the dark side, Vader spent the years after his transformation hunting down and exterminating the remaining Jedi who had survived Order 66. Given how many deadly situations and dangerous opponents he had stared down and lived to tell the tale, Luke Skywalker shouldn't have been any kind of a challenge for his father. He had only begun to discover his strength with the Force, had almost no formal training in the Jedi arts, and had never even practiced dueling with a lightsaber. In fact, Vader had easily defeated Luke in their first meeting on Cloud City, toying with his son to test his skills before cutting his hand off to end the fight. Even with another year to develop his skills following that first duel, Luke shouldn't have been anywhere near ready to fight Vader again when they had their second match on the second Death Star. Despite that, Luke was somehow able to overwhelm Vader in that second duel, returning the favor by cutting his own prosthetic hand off in the process. In the moment, it appeared that Luke had found a greater strength within himself by tapping into his own anger and hate. But was that really enough to make the difference? Or was there more at play here? Let's look at the different possibilities of how that second fight between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader came to the conclusion that it did. Starting with the possibility that Luke was indeed a legitimate match for Vader by the time of their second duel. Anakin Skywalker had had quite a lot of power at his disposal, and even though Luke wasn't the chosen one himself, it would stand to reason that being Anakin's son meant that Luke could have become nearly as strong as his father, or possibly even his equal with the Force. He hadn't gotten a fraction of the training that Vader had, but may have been close enough to Vader when it came to the Force that it made up some of the difference. There's also something to be said for the fact that, unlike Vader, Luke had a nearly complete body, with the exception of his hand. One of the things that made Luke so desirable to Palpatine as a potential apprentice was the fact that he didn't have the same handicaps as Anakin did. Because after spending Anakin's entire life grooming him to become his ultimate weapon, the Emperor was not pleased to discover how diminished his new apprentice had become after losing his duel against Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar. If Luke became as powerful as Vader could have been, that would have very much made him a weapon that the Emperor would want control of. It would have also made him strong enough to defeat Vader himself, despite the other areas in which he was lacking. Whether Luke actually was strong enough to defeat Vader without tapping into the dark side at that time is unclear. Another possibility is that Luke wasn't as strong as Vader, but surprised him with that final flurry and came at him too quickly for Vader to react and defend himself. When Anakin Skywalker fought Count Dooku on Geonosis in Episode 2, he did so as a brash youth who overestimated his power and had his butt handed to him as a result. Dooku was a powerful fighter, so much so that Anakin shouldn't have been able to defeat him even by the time of their second fight in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. However, Anakin came at Dooku with such speed and fury that Dooku couldn't keep up, and ended up losing to what was, in most measurable terms, an inferior opponent. History repeated itself when Luke suffered a similarly one-sided loss to Vader in their first duel on Bespin, coming away short one hand as his father had against Dooku. Luke then, inexplicably, not only held his own against Vader in their next fight, but ended up rallying to victory when he came at Vader with such speed and fury that Vader couldn't keep up. How has this consistently worked so well in the Star Wars universe? Is a purely anarchic fighting style really a reliable way to come at such powerful and talented and skilled opponents? It's possible, especially since both Anakin and Luke tapped into the dark side during the closing moments of those two fights. In the case of Luke's victory over Vader, however, it may just come down to biology. As strong as Vader was with the Force, he couldn't compensate for the fact that he had badly scarred lungs that couldn't process oxygen like they used to. Luke's approach may not have worked so well against a complete Anakin Skywalker, but Darth Vader may simply have not had the cardio to keep pace. On the other hand, there's the possibility that Vader intentionally let Luke win. Darth Vader had easily defeated his son Luke on Bespin, not only far outclassing him as a swordsman, but also using the Force to hurl a number of objects at him. Not only did he not use most of the tricks that led him to victory the first time when they fought again, he seemed more focused on taunting Luke and reading his emotions than winning. This suggests that Vader had no desire to win the fight, and intentionally let Luke defeat him. Why would Vader do this, you ask? Well, he knew he was in a battle of life and death, and if he lost, then either Luke would kill him if he joined the Emperor, or the Emperor would for failing him if Luke didn't. One way or another, losing this fight would have resulted in Vader's death no matter which way the wind blew with Luke, so what reason could Vader possibly have for intentionally throwing the fight? Well, two reasons actually come to mind, and the first is compassion for his son. Despite the way Vader had killed his own emotions in the years since Padme's death, the one thing that still managed to get to him was the fact that he cared about Luke. Despite what he claimed, Luke had indeed stirred a conflict within him, and he wasn't going to be responsible for killing his own son, no matter what the Emperor wanted. The other reason is that Vader may just have been tired of his life and wanted it to be over. After all the years of anguish he had suffered, literally since the age of 9, Vader may just have wanted to be free, and if it meant saving his son from the Emperor's wrath, he may have been willing to take the bullet and kill two birds with one stone. In fact, given how quick he was to willingly absorb fatal damage to his life support suit by grabbing the Emperor, it's not a stretch to say that Vader just wanted out. Speaking of the Emperor, what about the possibility that he used the Force to influence the outcome of that fight? So Emperor Palpatine had shown on more than one occasion that he wasn't above interjecting himself into situations where he saw an opportunity to, quote-unquote, guide events toward a desired result. He was also very strong with the Force himself, and could have almost certainly been able to find ways to influence the outcome of the duel without either Vader or Luke even realizing it. It also wouldn't have been the first time he intentionally sacrificed one apprentice in a gamble to get an even better one. Just ask Count Dooku. Remember, the Emperor is so good at concealing his strength with the Force that he was able to hide himself from even the most powerful Jedi for close to 2 decades without being discovered. If he can fly under the radar like that for as long as he had, there's no reason to believe that he couldn't have helped Luke from only a few feet away. But what would be his vested interest in helping Luke defeat Vader? Well, it goes back to the fact that, after spending Anakin's entire life grooming him for an eventual turn to the Sith, he wound up with a quadruple amputee who needed a breathing apparatus to survive. He saw Luke as having the potential to be the apprentice he thought Anakin would become, and even if he wasn't as strong as his father yet, if the Emperor was confident he could make up the difference with his own training, that may have been enough to convince him to lend Luke his support. On the other hand, the conflict Luke had stirred in Vader may have just simply distracted him enough to allow Luke to beat him. Anakin Skywalker always had trouble focusing on the moment, especially when his emotions got away from him. His extermination of an entire tribe of Sand People, his impulse decision to behead Count Dooku, and the blind rage that cost him much of his body on Mustafar were all examples of how badly Anakin lost his way when he wasn't thinking clearly. His crippling on Mustafar actually became something of a blessing in disguise, because it was the wake-up call Anakin had needed for years to slow down and become a more intelligent warrior. Besides, it's not like he could have kept barreling straight at his opponents even if he wanted to, since his injuries left him unable to do many of the things that he could before. Instead, he had to learn to use the Force in more intelligent ways that did most of the work for him and minimized the need for him to exert himself physically. It took almost 20 years for Vader to become so blinded by emotion that he started making mistakes during a fight again, but it definitely happened in his second duel with Luke. Thanks to the conflict over his feelings towards Luke, not to mention the flood of long-buried emotions about Padme and his old life that came rushing back when he discovered his son, Vader was simply not able to be the soulless killing machine he had been for so long. Despite his admonition to Luke about the very same, Vader let his guard down and gave Luke the opening he needed. However it happened, Luke accomplished what scores of fully trained Jedi with a lifetime of experience before him were unable to. He defeated Darth Vader, and more unbelievably than that, caused him to turn back to the light and fulfill his destiny by destroying the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave them in the comments section below and the reasons you think Luke Skywalker was able to defeat Darth Vader in The Return of the Jedi. If you'd like to support the Star Wars Wavelength channel, please click subscribe so you can check back in whenever new videos are posted. Thanks again for watching, and may the Force be with you, always.